Hello again, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another edition of the Cage Rage podcast. I'm your host, Chadillac. I am here today to talk to you about the history of boxing, specifically the history of boxing with Donald Trump. Of course, joining me is my fight analyst and co-host, Miguel Iterati from South America. Miguel, how are you doing today?
How you doing?
Good to see you again, buddy.
Not sure what we got for the world on Donald Trump and history and stuff, but we'll get some boxing in there and hopefully have some fun doing it.
Well, hopefully it all ties together in the end because it's relevant here. He's got the whole United States up in an uproar, and I sort of get it. Sometimes I kind of wonder if maybe he's doing the right thing in a weird way. As a far left liberal, it's becoming harder and harder to be a far left liberal, to be quite honest. Certainly never going to be a rightist, but I don't know what I am anymore. And I think a lot of people are starting to face that. So I thought what we might do today is go back through history and let's talk a little bit about Donald Trump and what he's done for fight game in general. I mean, look, just as far as what we did together with Bodog Entertainment, with MFC, and with Euphoria, how many times did we use the Trump Plaza, the Trump Taj Mahal? How many times did we use all of that stuff? When Trump came to the building, watched the shows, etc. You know, I never personally met the guy, didn't care to, but I don't know him. I can't say anything good or bad about him personally. I could say a lot of terrible stuff about what I've heard about his sound bites and his news clips, but we all know that stuff can be manipulated to be anything you want it to be. I'm sure this will be. So what? What have you got to say about that, Miguel? So first, lead us into, give me a little bit of the history on that, because we're talking boxing today. So when we're talking boxing, we're trying to talk history a lot of the times. So take us there first. Where are we at?
Well, you know, in terms of, we now have a president sitting in the White House that has been involved in boxing and boxing promotions as well. And
a great deal.
Go back, yeah, you got to actually go back to Teddy Roosevelt. You know, maybe to have as close an association between the presidency of the United States and boxing.
Explain that a little bit.
Well, Teddy was definitely a known boxing fan. He was, if I'm not mistaken, he was governor of New York.
He was also a judoka, and he also studied actual Gracie Jiu-Jitsu.
Right, he was put it this way, Teddy Roosevelt was a fucking man's man, you know?
No doubt about that.
He was
the last one we had as a president.
And after his presidency, he actually took some time off and ran again. Didn't win another time in the White House, but he ran again sometime, I think it was 1912 or around there. And at some point on the campaign trail, he got shot. They shot him. And he just brushed it off. He goes, nah, I'm not going to die. And he did his speech anyway. So Teddy Roosevelt was a man's man. And there's a lot of documentation about Teddy going to boxing matches. Again, as governor of New York, he would have known Old Smoke. Let me get Old Smoke's name out here, because Old Smoke was one of the Tammany crew in New York City. The old
no, Aaron, put in the verse, I'm a hard motherfucker. Woo, woo, I'm a hard motherfucker. Woo, woo. Go ahead, Miguel.
Now, John Morrissey is, an American that if you look him up, he was a Democratic state senator from New York and stuff. And so this is where Teddy came up through. You know, so he'd been to boxing matches, he'd seen boxing, and it was when boxing was a man's sport. Teddy liked it. some of the fights we've talked about that occurred out west with Joe Gans and things like that. Very well documented that his son Kermit used to take the train across the country to go see the fights while he was sitting president. So we haven't had an association like that with the presidency since I believe Teddy Roosevelt. I don't think that there was another president that promoted boxing or was involved in boxing at that level or watched it so publicly and closely. Trump nowadays, I don't think he's really done anything like go to a boxing match or something like since he's been president. But he did definitely, with the pardoning of Jack Johnson, definitely put a stamp, a little boxing note asterisk on his presidency. And I think if you look back at the man, that for boxing, I think boxing's 80s and 90s heyday can be looked back at. Donald Trump was very much a big part of that, offering his buildings to Don King. They've got the casinos there in Atlantic City. If the casino wasn't big enough, they'd do a fight in Convention Hall.
Right.
There's documentation out there about Tyson fighting Michael Spinks for $11 million. Tyson says it. Hey, Trump paid me $11 million for that fight. So at that point, he was the one of the big icons in boxing, working with the other big icons in boxing, and it suited Trump at the time in the early 80s and early 90s. Already wealthy, already on his way being iconic status. So the art of the deal and board games called Trump and things like that. He was already marketing himself, And the boxing thing, I think, is very much something that I think he likes boxing. I think at the end of the day, the idea of two men figuring it out, like that and stuff, appeals to him. I think Trump would consider himself a man's man, like a manly guy. And I think that boxing appeals to him, and he likes it. So in that time frame with his wealth and stuff, he's got his casinos. And, there were many big boxing matches that went through the Trump Plaza, the Trump Taj Mahal. At the end of the day,
some of the biggest.
Yeah, exactly. Like, for example, the Michael Spinks, Mike Tyson fight.
Yeah.
That happened at Convention Hall, but under the auspices of Don King and Donald Trump on there. And I mean, that fight, it turned out to be a 90-second elevation of Tyson, to a mythical status, really. And it was Spinks' only loss. But when it went into it, it was two undefeated fighters fighting for the heavyweight championship. So it was really a major and big appealing fight. And, Trump's always tried to associate himself with elite level stuff. So when he went into boxing, that he didn't want to do, small level stuff. And he's got the buildings. They all hosted, Trump Taj Mahal, Trump Plaza, the other buildings there. He's had boxing matches at all. But I think, over 40 events at the Trump Plaza in boxing alone. So you look back at it, every legend is fought. Bernard Hopkins from this era, heavyweights, I saw a card that had Trevor Burbick at the main event. Tony Tubbs, so they always lean the heavyweights were there, and the best fighters were there from that era. You know what I mean? So Trump now as president, it would be interesting to see him say, Deontay Wilder against Anthony Joshua, I'm going to go see that. Because who's going to tell the president, now you can't go, It'd be interesting to have the president sitting front row. When, what's the name of the Australian heavyweight that had steroid problems? I forget his name, but the Australian that went and fought in Russia and had to give up the championship because of a positive steroid test, but when you had that fight, which was Lucas Brown against Ruslan Chagayev in Russia, the president of Chechnya was at that fight. You know what I mean? So it happens that, you can get that. I'm certain that if Pacquiao fought in the Philippines again, you might get the president of the Philippines there. So it's certain, but it does give you like a crossover, like, hey, like a news piece for your boxing thing that crosses over, The president of the country was there. And the United States hasn't had that as a possibility in a long time. And maybe now with Trump, he might take a weekend off from golfing and go see a boxing match. I don't know. It's possible.
Yeah, well, Putin is he's judoka. He does some jiu-jitsu. Um, and he is a legitimate martial artist. He's a legitimate black belt in judo, and he's I mean, as far as I'm concerned, he's legitimate badass. So Trump, in some weird way, um, you got to figure he kind of admires Putin. Do you think there's a tie to that?
Yeah, Putin's another guy that he actually attended our show when Fedor fought Matt Lindland, and you know that he likes to make a statement and do manly things. He's always
Yeah.
shown on horseback and things like that. And I think if you were a little bit younger, you might have seen a campaign like that from Trump, where the outdoors guy, the guy hunting tigers and stuff like that, because Putin likes to project that image. I think that at this point in his life, Trump definitely weighs himself and measures himself against a guy like Putin. He's going to fall short in, as you stated, actual martial arts qualifications, because Putin, at the end of the day, was a spy, and the Russian system had him, he trained as a judo fighter for a while. It's obvious now when he dons the gi and fools around with people and stuff that he knows what he's doing. He knows how to move. You know what I mean? So that's like you said, you learned wrestling as a kid. You can tell when somebody knows, and Putin knows. Teddy Roosevelt used to have boxers come to the White House and work out with him. And Trump doesn't work out much. He has 12 Diet Cokes a day or something like that, right? But
McDonald's and 12 Diet Cokes do not equal working out. That's for sure.
it's not reps. That's not reps, dude. That doesn't count. So, but at the end of the day, I think that the idea of projecting a macho image, a manly image, I think that's very Trump. You know what I mean? It goes down to when he wasn't president, didn't even want to be president. And he said a few things that were controversial in public because he really didn't give a shit. And what I'm talking about is the women. From his first wife, and she was a model. She got a little older, and this is just what it looks like, Donnie. Don't get mad at me, but it always looked like like my Mercedes is 5 years old. I'll get the latest Mercedes, and I'll get another Mercedes, and until at some point that game gets old. But you are very much like to project a viral image,
Sure.
his women and his male stuff. And I think boxing played right along with that, came at the right time for Trump. And he invested. I think he likes it, but I don't think,
Well, I don't. To be fair, his virility is reflected in the idea of watching two other people do something that he can't do, and it makes him feel as if it reflects upon him that he can be that person. And so, maybe this is just my liberal talk. I don't know, but what it says to me is, at least he's willing. At least he has the goddamn balls to say, I'm going to watch boxing. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to watch MMA. I'm going to enjoy it. And I don't give a shit who says anything about it. Where we haven't had a president in a really, really long time who has stood up and said, I'm going to do whatever I'm going to do, and goddamn the press. And that's the one thing I can say about Donald Trump that I like. I don't like anything else about him. He's a racist. He's a bigot. He's a fucking pig. He's a misogynist piece of shit. I agree with every bit of that. But at least he's goddamn real. Can we agree on that?
This is what I'll say, because I haven't lived in the States under Trump's presidency, so I'm not.
Okay, that's fair enough. I apologize. That's not fair of me to drag you into that.
I grew up in New York City, 15 miles from his house. My brothers removed snow from his father's house. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I've known about Donald Trump since I was a little boy, and he was an entity, and they were an entity back then. So so that carries a little bit of weight, because I think that you missed a point there. And what you talked about is looking for a little bit of a reflection in men doing something physical he can't do, like a little bit of a bump to his virility, to his manliness, right? I think what you missed and what's integral in him and people like him is the buzz of being the man that made it happen. The guy, I paid for it all, And that kind of, like the wallet trumps the handsome guy, like with the young girls, you know what I mean? It's kind of like he trumps everybody, the athletes and everybody, because he's the guy that makes the whole thing happen. I think the sponsorships and the money guys, the lube guys, they get an ego bump from that also.
Okay, and Miguel.
Nobody would have made those fights for $11 million.
I totally agree with that. Is that what separates me? Is that what makes me wrong as a liberal in comparison to the far right guy who says Trump's right, you're wrong, you're a liberal, you're a leftist idiot, you don't know what you're talking about? Is that the difference?
Here's the thing. I'm not.
No. I'm asking you. I'm asking you to do this. Coming from somebody who's out of country, who's been out of country for many, many years, who's completely separated from it, but still has a true attachment to it. Talk to me about it. Tell me about this. Let's get into this and fuck it. Fuck what anybody thinks about any of it. I don't give a shit. Let's just talk about it.
Well, exactly what does he want me to say? Because Trump, I think that the ego that led him to do boxing and try to be the biggest promoter of boxing in the 80s and 90s is the same ego that at some point said, I can be president. And, to a certain extent, the money, he had it. They weren't going to tell him he didn't have the money. There's always talk about how he's worth less than the billions he says he is, and how his father was a tax guru that they pay virtually no taxes forever, and blah, blah, blah. All that, I don't know. He went to MIT Business School or Harvard Business School, the guy's an elite business mind. Making money, losing money, declaring bankruptcy, moving on to the next one, doing all that stuff. That's the game that he's always played, right? So at some point, that's not enough. He wants...
Who cares? That's what you do when you do business. You declare bankruptcy. That's the only way to be successful.
And that to me he is, a genius at that. I don't know that necessarily prepares you for the presidency of the United States, because I think that is the hardest job in the world for a reason. It is one of those things where I don't know that he was so immersed for 70 years of his life in what he did that prepares you so much for what he's doing now. So there's some things he's in deep water on that he just doesn't have the context on. Just listen to him talk about Palestinians and Jews, or, mixed cultures of, how Russia used to be USSR and the 13 countries that Russia broke up into. I don't know that he could speak eloquently about all of that stuff, because I don't think he cared about it when it was happening. Now he's got to know all that stuff, and he's got to be on top of it. But here's the other part is I think he throws an unsurmountable amount of energy at this shit. He's actually really more comfortable 2 years in than you would expect. I thought he might quit by now.
I agree.
I thought he might quit by now, because the bottom line is here's a man that had everything. And the U.S. presidency is an extremely restrictive job. It's not like we're talking about boxing. He may not be able to go to a boxing match because it coincides with this, or there was also this going on, or all of a sudden the guy for the boxing match, his country flipped out and you got to ban it. He may not be able to go because of what he is now. Nobody used to tell Donald Trump what to do. So just by virtue of that, I think Howard Stern, who knows Donald Trump from being New York, icons themselves, I think he said it himself. He said, I don't think he's going to want, he's got to hate being president. But this old stubborn fucker said, you know what? People really think I can't do this. I'm going to do it. He seems more comfortable now, whereas a lot of people thought he might quit or this or that or the other stuff. He's coming into his own. And that's what makes him dangerous. He's insurmountable amounts of energy. Everything he's ever attacked, he's done at a high level, right? Just the boxing is an example. Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, the locking down Atlantic City in the heyday of Atlantic City. It's not the rundown Atlantic City when he was putting up the hotels and remaking the whole thing and stuff like that. he really changed. I think their articles. I did a little search because of their articles on Google when you search and stuff. That Larry Hazard, who's the commissioner, longtime commissioner of New Jersey boxing, credits Trump with their heyday, and you can't. He says you can't change history. He was good for boxing. Is one of the quotes I read.
Right,
Um,
right.
there's one of those things where the sport has benefited from him, and he left, didn't do it, moved on, did his reality series and did everything, but went on to become president, left boxing behind. But I think boxing in the '90s was very much the presentation of Donald Trump, the man's man, the rich, the beyond rich guy, the like I said, the art of the deal, the book he published on money and stuff like that. It all came with a marketing campaign. You know what I mean? He was at that point trying to not be a behind the scenes rich guy. He wanted to be a television rich guy. And boxing, I think, was one of the first times where you saw him appearing, in that sort of paparazzi, where the paparazzi could follow. If you're following boxing, you're following Don King, and there's Trump with Don King, there's Trump with Tyson. Pictures, he starts appearing with those guys. That was one of the first times you saw him outside of, the red tie business guy in there. They didn't even really. You knew the name, Trump and the towers and everything like that, but visibility, boxing may have even been his first big steps out onto the world stage.
Right. So okay. Let's take it a step further. Donald Trump doesn't win in 2020, which I doubt. I doubt it. I think if he wants to run, which I think he's fucking crazy to do, but if he doesn't want to run in 2020, let me just say this first of all. I've walked away from the Democrat Party because they've gone completely off the rails. And I'm one of millions who have done that because of everything they have done in the last several months. If Donald Trump wins in 2020, which because of people like me who have been registered Democrats who have walked away from them, if he doesn't win in 2020 somehow though, does Trump go back into boxing? Does he go back into sports? Does he go back into promotions? What's he do?
What do you do for an encore, right?
That's a big one.
He's in his 70s, so
he's 76, right?
No. Yeah, I would think no.
73.
Yeah, he's old. By any stretch, he's old. And I think he's probably got bigger things in mind than boxing. I don't know what that is. But I think boxing is a piece of his history. I don't think he's going to come back and the ex-president comes back and says, "Yeah, I'm going to promote boxing. Let's do the Deontay Wilder Anthony Joshua fight. You need $100 million for it. Here it is." I don't think that's how his story ends. I think he's writing himself out. Like I think he's writing a story that way, and that's a step back in some ways.
I agree, but what is it?
Well, that's the thing is at his age he could die in office of natural causes. And I mean that happened with Reagan at the time too. There was a little bit of concern. Once you have a president in his 70s, he didn't wake up. He just died naturally in his sleep, and it was peaceful and things like that. Now that's a disgusting. I'm not wishing it on anybody and stuff, but at his age, let's say he makes it to the end, and let's say he does till 2024, he's going to be 80. That's at a point where energy starts to drop off, or if you're going to be like a Bob Arum type, to name somebody with a lot of energy, or a Robert Mugabe, who was a African dictator that lasted into his deep old age and stuff. If he's going to be someone like that, I think he's going to have some type of big focus, and it may be, something like, I don't know, maybe, what would interest me would be to see him really back the idea of having a military in space, but in a proper way to really bolster the space program. That would be something that's forward thinking. Um, we know he's not going to do anything with the environment or anything like that, but you would think that he would want to tackle something major.
Yeah, well,
Boxing is.
I've said from day one I'm for Space Force. Yeah, anything that gets us into space and gets us further, so I'm for it, no matter how we do it. But well, within limits. But anyways, hey, we're at 22 minutes, and I think we've had a pretty good discussion on this one. Anything you want to add to it, Miguel?
Yeah, if you were looking for a little bit more boxing talk, check back on our other podcasts and stuff. We got a lot of boxing talk in there for you, a little bit of the talking back about Teddy and stuff like that. But it did become a little political. It was fun anyway, Chad, just because, at this point, Trump is the president of the United States, and Trump did do some boxing stuff. So, we'll go into more boxing history and other podcasts in a little bit more organized fashion. We won't get off track, but I enjoyed the podcast.
I did too. And listen, next week, just to fill the fans in, first of all, subscribe below. Click the goddamn button, subscribe, do whatever you got to do. I don't know how to do all that shit. I don't care. Just subscribe so that we can keep doing this for you, because I know there's a lot of you that really like it. There's a lot of people that are listening to us now. There's a lot of people that are viewing it. Please keep sending us all the information that I'm getting. Chadillac at thecageragepodcast.com. Miguel at thecageragepodcast.com. You can look us up on Facebook, Miguel Ederati on Facebook, Chad Wagner on Facebook. Just look at our ugly faces and you'll find us there. Cage Rage on Facebook, the Cage Rage Podcast on Facebook. What else, Miguel? What am I missing real quick here?
For boxing news, thesweetscience.com, theboxingchannel.com, and wrapping it all up is the International Brotherhood of Prize Fighters.
Thank you. Hey, just to wrap all this up, next week we're going to talk about, or actually Friday, I think we're going to talk about where the path is at, because we're going to know tomorrow what happens with Khabib and the commission. So Friday we'll be talking about what happens with Khabib, where that path goes, and whether we were right or wrong. We had a couple of different ideas on what happens with Khabib. Miguel believes that Khabib is going to be suspended for 1 year.
Yeah, I'll preface this. I'm not sure that we'll get the full decision tomorrow. I think we'll get the next step. I think we have a commission meeting where they might say, all right, we'll take this up again in September, or something like that. So I'm not sure we'll get a full resolution, but it is on the table for Wednesday.
Yeah, you know what? What they'll probably do is delay it for 6 months and then suspend him for 6 months, which means he gets a 1 year suspension either way. But yeah, the same thing happens that Miguel said would happen in the first place. I've had several people send me information, emails, messenger, things like that, and say, oh, the boxing commission's already said this and that's not going to happen. What Miguel says goes 90% of the time, and the 10% that it doesn't, what I say goes. So if you don't like it, fuck you. Subscribe below. Tell us what you think.
I don't mind being wrong in the Khabib situation. I'd love to be wrong and let the kid fight. I have no problems with it. I dealt with commissions. I know what the commissions are like, and at the end of the day, if they come forward and say, "No, we're not going to do anything," what does that look like for them? Because they're very ego-driven. They're very much worried about the perception of what they look like.
Yep.
They have to be. They're in charge, is what they.
That's
need
their
to
job.
project.
That's their job.
So you're gonna tell me that they're gonna put all that aside and not suspend this kid when they suspended people for pot. They just want suspension. So
right, when he jumped over a fence and attacked a group of people in the crowd. Nothing's going to happen. That's ridiculous.
I stick by it. I do think he'll be suspended by the commission at the end of the day. I think what's even more frightening is we know they held up $2 million of his purse, right? And I think what's gonna happen here, and this may happen tomorrow. Maybe we'll wait. But what's gonna happen here is they'll say, okay, here's 1.2. Yeah, we fined you 40%. Thanks.
Right. Well, hey, Miguel, this has been a really good time. But we're at our 30-minute mark, and so we got to cut it off. Thank you for listening. Chadillac at thecageragebepodcast.com. McGill at the CageRagePodcast.com. Subscribe below so we can keep doing this. We appreciate everything. Let us know everything that you're talking about, everything that you hate, everything that you love. We take it all into consideration. Namaste. Have a good day.